What if I told you that all those hours you've spent turning compost piles, balancing greens and browns, and waiting months for finished compost could be replaced by something so simple it feels like cheating? I stopped making traditional compost 3 years ago, and my garden has never been healthier or easier to manage. Before we dive in, if you find this approach as game-changing as I did, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. I share practical gardening tips that actually work in real American backyards. Hey there, garden friends! For years, I was obsessed with making perfect compost. 3 bins going at once, a pitchfork permanently stationed nearby, and mental notes about carbon to nitrogen ratios. Then I discovered something that made all that effort feel unnecessary. The method I'm using now is called chop and drop, and it's based on how nature has been building soil for millions of years without any human intervention. Now let's talk about combining chop and drop with cover cropping. In areas where I'm not actively growing vegetables, I plant cover crops like clover, vetch, or annual rye. These plants grow quickly, fix nitrogen if they're legumes, prevent erosion, and suppress weeds. Then, before they go to seed, I cut them down with a string trimmer, chop them up, and leave them right there as mulch. The chopped cover crops create a thick mulch layer while their roots break down underground, adding organic matter deep in the soil. A few weeks later, I can plant right through that mulch without removing it. This technique is especially powerful with nitrogen-fixing cover crops. When you chop them down at their peak, right before flowering, you're capturing all that nitrogen they pulled from the air. As they decompose, that nitrogen becomes available to whatever you plant next. I've used this to prepare beds for corn, tomatoes, and cabbage, and the results have been stunning. The plants grow fast, stay deep green, and produce abundantly without additional fertilizer. Do you currently use cover crops in your garden? Or is this something you've been curious about but haven't tried yet? Here's a myth I want to bust. People worry that chop and drop will tie up nitrogen in the soil. This concern comes from high carbon materials like wood chips, temporarily immobilizing nitrogen. But when you're using a mix of materials, some green and some brown, the nitrogen and carbon balance out naturally. Plus, this material sits on the surface, decomposing slowly from the bottom up. The bottom layer in contact with soil breaks down first and releases nutrients, while the top layer continues to protect and mulch. I've never seen nitrogen deficiency since switching to chop and drop, and my plants seem healthier than when I used traditional compost. Another concern is about pests and diseases overwintering in plant debris. Certain pests, like squash vine borers, can overwinter in debris, and some diseases can survive on dead material. But here's my perspective. Healthy soil creates healthy plants, and healthy plants are more resistant to pests and diseases. By continuously feeding my soil with chop and drop materials, I've built robust soil biology that makes my plants stronger. I also practice crop rotation, which breaks pest and disease cycles naturally. If I do have a serious problem on a specific plant, I simply remove that material from the garden entirely. But that's the exception, not the rule. Let me share one more application using chop and drop in ornamental beds and around trees. I have hostas, daylilies, and ornamental grasses throughout my yard. Every year, those plants produce foliage that dies back. Instead of raking it all up and hauling it away, I let nature take its course. I might chop up the largest stalks to help them break down faster, but otherwise I let the dead foliage sit where it falls. By spring, most has decomposed and disappeared, pulled into the soil by earthworms. The soil in those beds gets richer every year without me adding compost or fertilizer. I saved something for last that really demonstrates the power of this approach, and that's using chop and drop to build entirely new garden beds from scratch. When I wanted to create a new vegetable bed in an area that was just lawn, I didn't rent a tiller or spend hours digging out sod. Instead, I mowed the grass as short as possible, then covered the entire area with layers of cardboard to smother the grass and weeds. On top of that cardboard, I piled chopped leaves, grass clippings, kitchen scraps, and any other organic matter I had available. I built that pile about 8 to 12 inches thick. Then I just waited. Over the next few months, the cardboard broke down, the grass underneath died and decomposed, and all that organic matter on top turned into beautiful, rich soil. By the following spring, I had a thriving garden bed full of earthworms and ready to plant, and I never turned a shovel. This is sometimes called lasagna gardening or sheet mulching, and it's essentially chop and drop on steroids. You're building soil right on top of the ground using the same principles of in-place decomposition. This technique works beautifully anywhere in the country. In places with cold winters like Minnesota or Vermont, you can start building these beds in fall and let winter do some of the work for you as freeze-thaw cycles break down materials. In warmer regions like Texas or Georgia, decomposition happens faster, so you might be ready to plant in just a couple of months. The key is layering different types of materials, alternating carbon-rich browns like leaves and straw with nitrogen-rich greens like grass clippings and kitchen scraps, just like you would in a compost pile, except you're doing it right where you want to grow. What I love most about this approach is how it completely changes your relationship with yard waste. Nothing is waste anymore. Every fallen leaf, every grass clipping, every spent plant is a resource that stays in your garden system and makes your soil better. You stop seeing cleanup as a chore and start seeing it as an opportunity to feed your garden. When autumn comes and the leaves start falling, I actually get excited instead of feeling overwhelmed because I know I'm looking at next year's soil fertility literally dropping from the sky. Here's something I want to emphasize because it's made such a difference in my own gardening journey. Chop and drop isn't about being lazy or cutting corners. It's about working smarter and aligning your gardening practices with how nature has always functioned. Nature doesn't waste anything. Every organism that dies becomes food for something else. Every leaf that falls feeds the forest floor. By mimicking these natural cycles in our gardens, we create ecosystems that are more resilient, more productive, and more sustainable. We reduce our dependence on outside inputs like bags of compost, fertilizer, and mulch. We build soil that gets better every year instead of depleting it. And we do all of this with less work, less expense, and less environmental impact. I also want to acknowledge that this approach won't work for everyone in every situation. If you're gardening in containers on a balcony, chop and drop doesn't really apply. If you have a tiny urban garden with no room for mulch layers, you might still need traditional composting. If your neighborhood has strict regulations about yard appearance and you'll get complaints about leaving plant debris visible, you might need to be more selective about where and how you use this method. And if you genuinely enjoy the process of making compost, the satisfaction of turning a pile and watching it transform, then by all means keep doing it. There's no single right way to garden, but for those of us who want healthier soil, more productive gardens, and more time to actually enjoy our outdoor spaces instead of constantly working in them, Chop and Drop is transformative. It's freed me from the tyranny of the compost pile. It's turned every part of my yard into a soil-building machine. And it's given me gardens that are more beautiful, more abundant, and more self-sustaining than I ever thought possible. Think about what you could do with all the time you'd save by not managing compost piles. You could grow more varieties of vegetables. You could add a pollinator garden. You could simply sit in your garden with a cup of coffee and enjoy what you've created. That's what this method has given me, and I hope it does the same for you. So let me ask you this. What would you grow or create in your garden if you had an extra hour or two every week? Maybe it's time to try a different approach and find out. If you found this video helpful and want to see more practical gardening techniques that save time and build better soil, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below and let me know which part of Chop and Drop you're most excited to try in your own garden. And if you've already been using this method, I'd love to hear about your experiences and any tips you've discovered along the way. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening, friends! Here's what changed everything for me. In a forest, nobody's collecting fallen leaves, turning them in a bin, and waiting for them to break down before spreading them back. Nature simply drops organic matter right where it grows, and soil organisms get to work immediately. The decomposition happens in place, feeding the soil and plants without any material leaving the system. I realized I'd been removing nutrients from my garden beds, processing them elsewhere, and hauling finished compost back to where those nutrients came from. It was exhausting and completely unnecessary. So here's how Chop and Drop works. Instead of pulling spent plants, pruning debris, or grass clippings and dragging them to a compost pile, you chop them up and drop them right on the soil surface where they grew. Use pruning shears for woody material, a lawnmower to mulch leaves, or your hands for softer plants. Cut the material into smaller pieces so it breaks down faster. Then leave it right there as mulch. Over the following weeks and months, that organic matter decomposes in place, releasing nutrients back into the soil, improving soil structure, and protecting the surface from erosion and temperature extremes. Let me give you an example from my vegetable garden. When my tomato plants finish producing in late summer, I used to yank them out and haul them to the compost pile. Now I cut them off at soil level, chop the stems and leaves into 6-inch pieces, and lay them right back down. By spring, those tomato plants have completely disappeared, transformed into rich soil by earthworms and decomposers. The roots I left in the ground also break down underground, creating channels for air and water. I haven't lost a single nutrient, and I haven't spent a single minute turning a compost pile. What about weed seeds and plant diseases? If a plant had obvious disease problems like blight or powdery mildew, remove it entirely. Burn it, bag it for municipal composting, or bury it far from growing areas. But most of what we grow doesn't have serious disease issues. For weeds, if you chop and drop them before they go to seed, you're not creating a problem. I slice weeds off at ground level before they flower, chop them up, and leave them as mulch. They can't regrow without leaves, and they become soil food instead of waste. The benefits go way beyond saving time. Chop and drop creates a mulch layer that suppresses new weeds by blocking light. It regulates soil temperature, keeping roots cooler in summer and warmer in winter. It reduces water evaporation dramatically, which matters enormously in places like Arizona or Southern California. The decomposing plant matter feeds earthworms, which multiply and create rich castings throughout your beds. And because decomposition happens slowly, nutrients are released gradually right when plants can use them. Have you ever tried chop and drop? Or does traditional composting still feel like the only legitimate way to handle plant waste? Here's another advantage I didn't anticipate. This method eliminates physical strain. I'm not hauling heavy leaf bags, pushing loaded wheelbarrows, or bending over a compost bin with a pitchfork. Everything stays where it is, and nature does the work. For gardeners with limited mobility or chronic pain, this isn't just convenient, it's liberating. Let's talk about what works especially well, starting with grass clippings. If you're bagging clippings and sending them to the landfill, you're throwing away gold. Grass is rich in nitrogen, breaks down quickly, and makes excellent mulch around vegetables, fruit trees, and ornamental beds. After mowing, I spread clippings in a thin layer around my tomatoes, peppers, and berry bushes. Within weeks, they've decomposed and fed my plants without me doing anything except spreading them out. Keep layers thin, though, maybe half an inch, so they don't mat down and block water and air. Another fantastic material for chop and drop is autumn leaves. Every fall, maples, oaks, and birches carpet our yards in gold and crimson. Instead of bagging them, run your lawnmower over them to shred them into smaller pieces. Then spread those shredded leaves everywhere, around perennials, over finished vegetable beds, under fruit trees, and in pathways. They'll protect your soil all winter, and by spring, they'll have broken down into rich, crumbly material that earthworms have pulled into the soil. Oak leaves are particularly excellent because they're slightly acidic, benefiting blueberries and azaleas. Maple leaves break down quickly and improve clay soils. Here's a technique that changed my spring preparation. In late fall, after harvesting everything, I cover my empty beds with 4 to 6 inches of shredded leaves. By spring, that layer has compressed to maybe an inch or two, and the soil underneath is dark, soft, and alive with worms. I simply rake back the remaining leaves to create planting holes, set in my transplants, and pull the leaves back around them as mulch. No tilling, no digging, no compost spreading. Let's talk about using plant stems and stalks. When your sunflowers finish blooming or pepper plants succumb to frost, those thick stems seem too woody to break down quickly. But chop them into 3 to 6 inch sections with loppers, and they'll decompose much faster. Those chopped stalks create air pockets in your mulch layer, preventing matting and allowing water to penetrate. Corn stalks are especially great because they're hollow and break down surprisingly fast once chopped. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by fall garden cleanup? Or have you found ways to make that transition easier? This method gets really interesting for perennial gardens. Hostas, daylilies, and peonies all die back in fall. Instead of hauling debris away, I cut back the dead foliage, chop it up right there, and spread it around the base of the same plants. It creates natural mulch that suppresses weeds and feeds the soil. By the time perennials emerge in spring, most of that material has decomposed. The same works beautifully around roses and hydrangeas. Prune them in late winter, chop up the prunings, and drop them right at the base. One of my favorite applications is around fruit trees. Apple, peach, and cherry trees need regular pruning, and those prunings usually seem destined for the burn pile. Instead, I cut them into 6 to 12-inch pieces and create a mulch ring around the tree base, from about a foot from the trunk, out to the drip line, where feeder roots are located. Those woody prunings take longer to break down, sometimes a year or more, but they provide long-lasting mulch that suppresses grass while slowly releasing nutrients. Here's a bonus tip. Before spreading woody prunings around fruit trees, I sometimes scatter a thin layer of grass clippings or chopped leaves underneath. That nitrogen-rich material helps speed up decomposition of the woody brown material. It's like creating a mini compost pile right on the soil surface, except you never have to turn it. The soil organisms do all the work. Let me share something that might sound radical. I use chop and drop for annual flowers too. When marigolds, zinnias, and cosmos finish blooming, I cut them off at the base, chop up the stems and leaves, and leave them right there. If I want to plant something new, I push aside the chopped material, plant my seeds or transplants, and pull the mulch back around them. The decomposing flowers feed the soil and new plants. This approach has helped me maintain flower beds that keep getting better year after year without compost amendments. What's the biggest gardening chore you wish you could simplify or eliminate entirely? Here's something crucial. Mulch layer thickness matters. Around established perennials and shrubs, you can go 3 to 4 inches thick because those plants can push through easily. Around vegetable transplants and annual flowers, keep it thinner, 1 to 2 inches, so young plants aren't smothered. In pathways where you're suppressing weeds completely, pile it thick, 4 to 6 inches or more. The material compresses over time, so 6 inches often becomes 2 or 3 within a couple months. One material that deserves special attention is kitchen scraps. You absolutely can use them with this method, but be smart about it. I bury kitchen scraps directly in my garden beds, rather than leaving them on the surface where they might attract raccoons or possums. Here's my technique. Dig a small trench about 6 to 8 inches deep between rows of vegetables or around tomatoes and squash. Dump in vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, and fruit scraps. Then cover immediately with soil and maybe a layer of leaves on top. Within weeks, those scraps have broken down and fed the plants growing nearby. This is basically trench composting, another form of composting in place. The beauty of burying kitchen scraps